This is the Authority Company Podcast, conversations with leaders who are building the future. Hola, I'm Joe Partavilla, and today I'm joined by Brad Mahon. Brad is the president and CEO of Great Plains College in Saskatchewan, and he's also the author of the new book, Leadership is Personal, where he presents a compelling case for community-centric leadership that drives organizational success. We're going to talk about how a guitar player ended up running a school, the current state of higher ed, and if everyone really does need a college degree. Brad Mahon, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, you're very welcome. And I normally don't like to start talking about the title of the book because I feel like it's one of these lazy intros into a book. But the great thing about your title is because it actually ties into sort of my philosophy, and it's leadership is personal. That's the title of your book. And years ago, there was this Twitter executive, Sarah Personette, who said, business is the most personal thing in the world. Because, we always have this cliche, Brad, which I'm sure you kind of tie into the book somehow, but like, it's not personal, it's business. And I say, BS to that, Brad. There's nothing, like Sarah said, more personal than business. Like, if something happens in your business, it doesn't affect just the business. It affects you as a human being. Unless we've done like a severance thing, Brad, where we could disconnect the innies and the outies, there is going to be a tie-in. So let's start with that just word personal. Leadership is personal. Why was that so important to be part of your message?
Well, you bring up a good point. I'm glad you said it about the bottom line and this is just business because one of the things I think part of the core premise of the book is that personal element of leadership. How we as leaders connect and build community inside our organizations and how we as leaders connect with and build community outside of our organizations, with external stakeholders. And, you know, when I say it like that, it sounds like kumbaya. What a beautiful, world. But the reality of it is, I mean, this idea about building culture internally, building culture externally. It is about business success. Those things connect to business success. So, it's really important for me for people to realize that I understand the bottom line. In fact, I've had professional roles where, with so much pride, my team and I have built that strong internal culture where employees are proud of where they work. They come to work every day. They bring their best professional selves. They engage with your customers. They engage with each other. My team and I building that sort of ferocious external community of support, but also recognizing that at the end of each fiscal year, I was often judged, whether it was by the board or whether it was by my, the person that I was reporting to. I was judged by a number. I was often judged by that single number. And that is something that I'm aware of. And I think it's really, as I said, important for people to know that this book doesn't dismiss that. There's still a fiscal responsibility. And one of the things that I say, I mean, I've shared, with you, a little bit on my background, when we're getting to know each other. A lot of my career has been in the arts, or it's been leading arts organizations. A lot of it in higher education, post-secondary. And one of my messages, to my constituents and my stakeholders is, yes, it might be running a faculty or a college or a university, but it's still a multi-million-dollar business, and we still bring that business acumen to it. But getting back, to where we started, we never want to lose that personal element, that connection, because at the end of the day, that good work that we're doing both inside and outside of our organization, building that community of support where whether somebody is inside of your business or outside of your business, however they engage your business, they look at it and they say, that is a value. I value that business in the community. If you can get there where the person in the hallway or the person outside my window here walking down the street says that business is important to our community, I mean, that is such an important thing for you to have cultivated.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up the fact that, you cut your teeth, in this higher education space. And I have a lot of friends that work in the nonprofit space and obviously work with a lot of them. But it is funny how from the outside world, when you hear nonprofit and education, they're like, oh yeah, so it's all altruistic. It's all philanthropic. Well, yeah, no, at the end of the day, it's about business. And it's funny. I remember I was talking to someone once in the nonprofit world, and I was joking with them. I'm like, you guys are the most ruthless people in the world because those nonprofit dollars are few and far between, and it's a struggle to succeed and acquire assets for a nonprofit to grow and to succeed. So tell us about how in terms of that, like higher education, where like, yes, the goal is to educate people, but as you mentioned, that bottom line, that little number at the end of the year, that's equally important for many people as well.
Yeah, and I love the way you said that. I mean, the dollars they are few and far between, and you want a great product, and whether I'm talking about higher education, having relevant programming. I mean, that's about connecting to your community too. How do you know what relevant programming is? And I could talk a little bit about that later. Getting out to your community, understanding what it is your community wants from you. Both in higher ed and in arts. But I think though too, you know, when you think about how to stretch those dollars. You're putting a good product out there, but that's a big part of it is building that sense of community and shared ownership. And one of the things that I talk a lot about in the book is especially the idea of creating partners and having that partnership, leveraging that economy of scale. There's a story that I like to tell where and this is where it relates, I think, to me in higher education and also in the arts sector. But when I have two adult children right now, they're in their mid-20s and they're out there in the world swimming around. And relatedly, when they were younger, what do you want to do? What sports and hobbies do you want to try? And maybe try music, maybe try dance. So, letting them explore that. But there's one thing that they had to do, and that was swimming lessons. And the reason why I insisted that they go into swimming lessons, because I truly believed it was a life skill, that one day that may save their life. They didn't have to join the swim team or be competitive. I just needed to know that if they fell in the water, they could tread water and swim. And I feel like it is the same in business. That ability to go out into the community and create those meaningful win-win relationships, that is a survival skill. That's a life skill in business, especially if you're in a sector where, perhaps like we compared it to arts and higher education. Yes, we're bringing in revenue through customers. If you're in an arts organization, you do have people coming through the ticket style and paying those ticket fees. But often the tickets aren't paying your costs alone. To your point, there is some philanthropy, there is some funding, there's some partnerships that are happening. And the same in higher education. Yes, students are coming and they're paying their tuition, but the tuition doesn't cover the cost of operating the organization. So again, what partnerships can we find in the community? Meaningful partnerships where we leverage those economies of scale, find those values that align, so that we can serve our students, serve our clients.
That's great. Now, you mentioned skills. I want to pick at one of your skills. You were a professional guitar player, which to me, that is the most of any skill I'm jealous about. It's guitar playing. When I was a little kid, Brad, I went to see the movie La Bamba, and I thought I wanted to be the next Richie Valens. I took guitar lessons for a week, and I realized this is way too GD hard for me to do, Brad. So my guitar career was very short lived. I later found out, Brad, Lou Diamond Phillips didn't even play the guitar in the movie, and he lip synced the whole thing. But that's neither
He
here nor
he
there.
did it well, though. He did it well.
You did do well. Thank you, Brad. But talk about you mentioned how like life skills and swimming with your kids. How about guitar playing and influencing sort of your leadership journey? Because I wonder if there's skills that you acquire just from becoming a better guitar player that either make you a better human and b a better leader.
Yeah, that's that there's first of all, thank you. I mean, appreciate the comments. And for me, it took a little while for me to understand and recognize those transferable skills, we'll call them. And I do believe that you have those. You can have some sort of formal education or training in one area and see how those transfer to the other. I would say for me though, particularly when I found myself in the leadership chair, I really suffered from imposter syndrome because I used to think to myself, I have degrees in guitar playing and now I'm, managing people. And, the budgets kind of went from six figures to seven figures to eight figures. And again, I think easy to feel a little bit and understandable to feel a little bit of overwhelm. Not, well, man, so many of us, we were trained for leadership. I didn't lie in bed at night as a youngster, as a teenager, and dream of leading a post-secondary or leading an arts organization. I mean, often, I was dreaming about, moving to LA and, being a lead guitar in a hair metal band or something like that. I mean, that's what you dreamed of. And so I think that, for so many of us, throughout my career, building a network of colleagues and sharing our stories, we kind of were these accidental leaders. We sort of find ourselves in leadership roles. And and I think that for many of us, it's about kind of going back and filling in the gaps. And, for me, a big part of that was kind of reflecting. I mean, I talk a lot about reflection in the book, but reflecting on how I had, found my way with guitar playing. Because, one of the things is that, I think while eventually I got to a point where I was very comfortable on stage and I felt like, I felt confident in sharing my skills and communicating, music. I mean, there was a time when I used to perform and I was very discouraged. I would perform, I would leave the stage and I would say, why is it that I can't communicate the way I communicate when I'm in the practice room or in rehearsal? I would get onto stage, my mind was racing, I was filled with self doubt and a lot of mental chatter in my head. And I would say, Joe, what happened is a lot of the same things happened when I started those leadership roles. And I found myself, my colleagues were supportive. At first I thought, I told myself story, my colleagues aren't going to support me. They're not going to respect my colleagues were on board. They were wonderful. But I was in my own head about, feeling that imposter syndrome, feeling that there was too many gaps. What am I doing here sitting at the boardroom table? And so, going back to kind of overcoming that as a musician, I used to think when I would leave the stage and have some stumbles, well, the answer is I need to spend more time on the fretboard. I just need to practice more practice, more practice. And I actually had my guitar professor said to me, she said, "Well, what if we actually explored the psychology of performance?" And she pointed me in the direction of sports psychology, and we found the parallels between sports psychology to, performance psychology in general. And I would say to me, I started to look more and more at leadership in the same way I was looking at performance. I started to think a little bit about that curiosity that I would have in my mind. Why was I feeling that certain way? The idea of reflection. When I would have a performance, kind of sitting, reviewing the performance, thinking to myself about, what worked, what didn't work, why was I thinking certain ways, and I would do the same things after a meeting or after an interaction with a colleague, sitting down, trying to understand why I had reacted or behaved a certain way. And it was really that way of sort of that self reflection. I started to develop that self awareness that helped me as a musician. It started to help me as a leader. And the main thing that I would say is I also recognized the need to study. And I will say, as a young leader, I didn't understand that leadership was a discipline of study. And I began to find and immerse myself in leadership literature, learning from others who, had done the things that I was just beginning to start to explore. And so I found that connection, as I said, between that sort of the psychology of sports to the psychology of performance to the psychology of mindset and leadership.
Nice. Love that. And it's funny you mentioned transferable skills. And, if you do something long enough, you see how the tides change. And so when I started doing business podcasts, Brad, it was this whole, and I would do like all different things. So one of them was working with a lot of HR, thought leaders. And at early on, Brad, the funny thing is HR hiring official, didn't believe in transferable skills. You only hire on past experience. And then Brad, this tricky little thing called the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden, people had to reinvent the way they hired. Like, oh, you mean we could probably get people in other sectors to do this job because they have transferable skills. And you've probably seen this in your career as well, in arts and education, and the fact that, what, just because you do one thing well, it doesn't mean that's the only thing you can do. You could do that in other places.
Absolutely. And I think to those points, it requires a little bit of a deeper dive on some of those folks that are coming into your organization. And I think, competencies matter. I know we often, and I do it currently and in other organizations I've worked where we have these, you have to have this many years minimum and you have to have these credentials. And, I certainly don't want to dismiss that. But we also have to recognize that years of service and credential, these are things that are learned or earned over time. But getting to know who these people are and what do they value? What are their qualities as a person? And how does that align with your organization? Both what you have in terms of your internal culture, I don't, sometimes you hear it called fit, and I think that, that there's a little bit to unpack there, because I think it's also okay to have folks who are going to come in and bring a diversity to your organization too. I always say, the best example of that is, I always say, if you look at our leadership table, if it was a table full of Brads, we'd be doomed, right? You want different thinkers at the table, people who are going to bring different ideas and different perspectives. So it's not necessarily about that, but it's really about finding folks who have that values alignment. And I talk a lot about values in the book, and discovering those values. When we're younger, I think it's very natural, our parents, our family, close friends, maybe if, we go to church or we play competitive sports, there's people who sort of imprint values on us and we're impacted by that. I think at some point though, as we kind of fly the nest or get out into the world, we start to think to ourselves, who am I as a person, right? I mean, you've got these family values rooted, but what is it that I really value and believe? And then related to the book, how does that affect how I lead people? Right. And so, I think for me, those are sort of the questions that I've asked myself in the journey that I've been on. And I think the spoiler alert is it really comes from taking that time every day to sit and ask yourself questions, right? Take yourself, through some exercises where you can really come up with your values. Because the one thing I would say to you as a leader is every day you will be challenged. There's a lot of folks pulling you in different directions. There's competing priorities, and the decisions you make, it's not unusual for them to be questioned or challenged. And the more you can show the alignment between your values, the organization's values, and those decisions that you make, that keeps you on the higher ground.
That's great. That's really good. And it's funny, I don't want to get too off topic here, but um the one thing that we do as a human race is we're really good at overcorrecting. So for many, many years, to get a job, regardless of the job, it was you need a college degree. Have to have a college degree. And now the overcorrection has happened. Now it's like if you've got a pulse, you can apply for this job. And I know we're not good at, happy mediums, but tell me about navigating this happy medium now. And it's so funny too because there's a commercial running recently. I think it's for like a job company that like a girl is interviewing for I think like a hospitality position, and the guy says, "Oh, you can't work here because you don't have a college degree." She goes, "Well, if I had a degree in poetry, would that be good? Even though it has nothing to do with hospitality?" He goes, "Oh yeah, yeah, that you could get this job because you have a poetry degree because it has to be you have to have a college degree." So tell me about now as we navigate 2025, where we went from everybody has to have a college degree to now nobody needs a college degree. And of course, I'm exaggerating here, but tell us how we thread the middle there.
That is, I think, and what you highlighted, a great question, and I think that really does a nice job of setting the table of the current state. There's never been a time where we've had to really justify our existence or validate our credentials in many ways. And I think that I think part of it, Joe, in total honesty, I mean, I think we can own some of that. I think it is up to us as leaders, and I'm speaking to my colleagues in post-secondary, it's part of us to get out there and tell our story and to tell people about our value proposition. I think that's on us. And I think, again, one of the ways we do that is to get out, to be visible, to engage with our community, participate, show that we are part of the community that we serve. And I really believe in that service. And so I think that comes a little bit on us is getting out, telling our story, that value proposition that we have. And then I think also in being provocative and engaging in that conversation about what are these new alternative credentials. And you hear things about micro credentials or how do we evaluate competencies, right? Okay, maybe this person doesn't have a traditional post-secondary background, but they have these, can they demonstrate these competencies? And I think more and more, you see some alternative forms of credentialing or education happen with companies like Microsoft and Google, offering up to bring folks on who may not have a lot of background experience and train them themselves. But again, I think the folks that they're bringing in are folks that they're looking for that cultural and values fit and saying, "Hey, we'll help train you." So anyway, it's sort of a long roundabout way of saying I think we've got to meet people in the middle on this one. I think we've got to get out there, tell that story, and and basically show people why it is we still matter.
Nice. All right, well, let's get to the book. Leadership is personal, and I want to get into community engagement. And one of the things that I've always found fascinating is that if you live in a college town, it's it's assumed that college town means, oh, it's a college in a town. But if you live in a college town, you know it's more than that, because it's almost like that college becomes a living, breathing part of the community. Like, if it's as if you took that college out of there, that town would be dead, because so much goes with it, whether it's when it comes to the economy or culture. So, tying it into the book, tell me about community engagement and higher education and how it works. Maybe there's something in the book you can mention, but let's dig into this a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And I loved that example you gave about the college town, because I think when you have those examples of a college town, I think there's a great example of, in many cases, a community, when you ask those community members, about the college, what is your opinion? Do you value, folks will recognize the greater impact that that college brings. And what I mean by the greater impact is, yes, the college's business sector may be to, educate and train. Uh, Perhaps the college employs many people. It's a big part of the economy in the community as well, too, right? It's part of that economic sector, and I think that that's part of it. It's back to the first thing that you and I talked about. I mean, we're talking about this idea of community engagement and building culture, but remember, it still is about that business success. And so, getting out there, being visible, participating, finding out what matters in the community, and then being part of it. And I think that's a really important message to have is, understanding what is it that your community values, and then how, as you as a college, can you intersect. And, I'll give you, an example. At our college, we don't have varsity athletics per se, but there is a Western Hockey League team in one of our campus communities, and obviously they're a big part of the community. Many nights when there's a game, that is the biggest event in town, and in many ways in the community, rightfully so. And so for us as a college, even though we don't offer sports management program, even though we don't necessarily have a hockey team ourselves, it's important for us to support that team. And the reason is, in many ways, even though you may not be able to directly link the post-secondary to the hockey team, that matters to the community. And if there's something that matters to the community, it's important for you as a business. I'm just talking about in our shop as a college, but any business, to say, how can we intersect with that? How can we be part of that and support that organization? Because that's a big part of it. When you have a business and you're really seen as part of the community, you're visible. If there's community events, you're there. I'll share a story with you, because I mean, this is something that I've been saying for years, and it was actually just recently we were in one of our other campus communities. They were having sort of a town economic fair, if you will, and we set up a booth because we thought all of the businesses in the town are going to be there, so we should be there. We set up a booth, and I came on the second day, and my staff member was at the booth, and I said to her, I said, how's the traffic been? And she said, well, there's been a lot of traffic. A lot of people have walked by, but not many people have come and interacted with the booth. And I said, oh, and before I could kind of answer or have any, she said to me, but this event is really important to this community, so I think it's great that we're here. And I thought to myself, I thought that was a great moment, because I thought, yes, that is exactly what we want. And the cool part is that was one of my colleagues, an employee, saying it back to me. And I thought to
Mm.
myself, yes, it's happening, right? Folks internal are recognizing that, for us to be that meaningful part of the community, we have to get out there and participate, show people. I mean, I can tell you that we're engaged with the community, but I want you, if you're out on the weekend or if you're at an event, you're going to see us there. You're going to see the brand there. We're going to be participating. We're going to have our logos there, right? We will support those events. And I think the only way that you know which events, to connect with, is to get out there and do it. And I have a motto, and I've had a few, grateful to have had a few stops in my journey. But I often say to, and I've recognized, and I say to other leaders, especially new folks, is, sometimes that first year it's about quantity over quality. I kind of would say I'll go to anything. So yeah, you get invited to a barbecue, some community bar, you go, I will go to anything because I think you need to try all of these events once to really kind of understand how they intersect with the community, how your business can be meaningfully a part of it. I would say, after that first year, you start to maybe get a little more selective and realize where you can really focus your energy on. But again, that first year, it's that quantity over quality. And then you'll find the quality after that.
Yeah, that's cool. I try to keep my movie anecdotes to one an episode, but I got another one here because this
Okay.
reminds me of the and I'm tying into community engagement where it's actually cuts both ways. It's the school and the community and the school. And I immediately think about when you were describing like how you connect with your community was breaking away. Remember the movie from 1980? It was about this kid who loved Italy, wanted to be a cyclist, but he just was like this working class kid in Indiana, and the college kids, and of course, it's a movie now, but the college kids would look down upon the local kids. They gave them the nickname cutters because I think they were like stone cutters in Indiana. Um, so it reminds me of like how this delicate balance of the school and the community. Is that something you sometimes have to keep an eye on as well? Just be like, hey, not only do we have to be present, but we actually have to be actively present, like you mentioned at that event.
Absolutely, and that's a great point you brought up because I think that it starts with me, modeling behavior. So, when I if I hope to see my staff at events, supporting events, if I hope to see the student at events, I need to be there myself, right? So it starts with me sort of modeling that behavior and certainly getting out there. But I think, what we've really cultivated to do, for example, if there's a civic parade or some kind of festival or event, having staff and faculty participate in those things, inviting our students to come to those things as well too, so that I think while the community appreciates, I mean, often when you're in a senior leadership role, you become the face of that organization, and there's a visibility to that. But I think it's really important for your internal stakeholders, your students, your customers, whoever, however you want to turn that, to bring them along here as well too. And so one of the things that we've really worked to do is to have our students part of these things too, whether it's in one of our other campus communities, there was we have sort of the business sector has these chambers of commerce, these business associations. They have their annual fundraising. We had students from our hospitality program, do the service. They did the bar service. They did the table service. A chance for the students to participate, in something like that. Actually, really proud because tomorrow night, I mean, another campus community, again, another one of these business association, chamber of commerce. We have many of our first year and second year students are meeting. We have an open house with some of the business leaders and community leaders coming in because it's a bit of a mixer. So the students can explain to them who they are, what it is they're looking for employment, and a chance for the community leaders to kind of come in and say, this is my business and this is how we might all fit. I mean, it's a bit of a matchmaker, if you will, right? But I think to your point, it's making sure that the students are sort of integrated into the culture, of the community. Back to I mentioned the hockey team. I'm in Canada. I got to talk to you about hockey, right? We
Sure.
knew that was going to come, and so back to our hockey team here. Having a college night where we work with that organization to make sure there's one evening where in force we have our college night, we have our students come down, they have discounted tickets, and we really kind of take over the rink for that one night. So I think it's important for our students too. I mean, not all of them will stay here after graduation. Not all of them will stay in the community. I mean, we hope they will because that's part of the, that economic impact they have when they decide to come here, they train here, they end up getting a job here. That's fantastic. They raise their life here, build their life. But I think not all the students will, but you hope that if they do leave, that they take a little piece of that with them, that they understood, they have a piece of that community with them when they go.
I love that. That's great. And I like to wrap up these conversations, Brad, by talking about the dedication in the book. And they're usually short and pithy, and sometimes it's mysterious. I think mine was like to my wife and mom, but yours is for those who have mentored me and each colleague and partner I've had a privilege of working with in appreciation for your trust and camaraderie. What does it mean to dedicate of all the people on the planet? Why was it important to dedicate the book to these folks?
Work has been a big always been a big part of my life. I mean, now people listening to that say, "Well, is for many of us we spend 40 plus hours," but I think beyond that, it's for my it's been a big part of my identity. Going back to being a young person and wanting to have a life with the guitar in my hands, and it was something that I thought about all the time, and I think the same thing with work. I'm very invested in it, and I get a lot of satisfaction. And relatedly, then back to your question, I've come to so I've had the privilege over the year working with so many different people, so many different colleagues, so many people have taken the time to help me along the way. I think for me too, I certainly have made mistakes, and I think part of this book, I share those mistakes, and how what I've learned from them, and what I now, if I could go back, what I would do differently. And certainly when you make mistakes, and there's people on the other end of those mistakes too, and right, so certainly that's not lost on me. So I think thinking about it, it's dedicating it to those folks that I've worked with, and perhaps we've achieved some great things together, and it's also dedicating it to folks who maybe maybe unfortunately our relationship didn't achieve some of those things. But for what it's worth, you wanted them to know that you appreciated them, you appreciate what they taught you. And again, as I said, with so many, thank you for your trust, because I think you know you recognize, especially I think as the leadership roles compound, and you realize that you end up in a situation where you've got hundreds of employees, and then you think of those employees' families, and you think of the thousands of people whose lives you have this impact on. And so there's a great responsibility there. Was it Uncle Ben? You quoted them. I'm gonna quote the Peter Parker, the Spider-Man. Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. I mean, I do think of that. I think Uncle Ben, that was a mic drop moment. And so that's not lost on me too. So yeah, so just appreciate people, trusting me, and it takes a while to earn that trust, certainly. And then I think when you earn that trust, you have to continue to keep that trust as well too. So yeah, that was important to me, because it certainly has been a journey, and it's been a journey that's, as I said, had some mistakes. But hopefully, and that's the premise of the book, is that hopefully, whether you're at the sort of this middle part of your career like I am, maybe with some runway ahead of you, or whether you're just starting out, hopefully people can learn, because as I said right off the very start today, so few of us are prepared for this. We find ourselves promoted often because we're good at our jobs. In my case, I think maybe I was good in the classroom, or anyway, I found myself suddenly thrust into this by accident, and found myself filling in those gaps after. So hopefully folks can take a few lessons away from the book.
Awesome. His name is Brad Mahon. The book, Leadership is Personal: How Community and Culture Lead to Business Success. It is out now. Brad, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. My pleasure. Thank you.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more about Brad and our authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.